sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning, everybody. You're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and Anaya Falarin Iman, and we're here all the way through until midday with a show full of all of today's biggest stories and lots of discussion topics as well.
Absolutely. Well, make sure that you get in touch with your views as usual. gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be reading all of that throughout the show. But first, here's the latest news.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. Here are the latest headlines. An investigation is underway after 2 women and 2 children died following a house fire in Bexley Heath in southeast London. The victims were rescued from the first floor, but all died at the scene. The government wasn't fully prepared for the wide-ranging impacts of the pandemic. That's according to a new report by the National Audit Office. It also found that crisis planning had been limited, with most of the government's emergency resources focused on mitigating a no-deal Brexit. 100 British military engineers are being deployed to Poland's border with Belarus to help tackle the migrant crisis. Thousands of people have been gathering along the border in freezing temperatures over the last few weeks. The EU has accused Belarus of deliberately creating the crisis, which Minsk denies. The England and Wales Cricket Board will meet with 18 first-class counties today to discuss equality in the sport. It follows Azim Rafiq's allegations of institutional racism. Teams are being asked to sign a 12-point action plan to improve diversity and inclusion. UK retail sales rose by 0.8% in October, boosted by early Christmas trading. It ends a 5-month run of falling or flat sales. The Office for National Statistics says second-hand items, toys and sports equipment sold particularly well. From next autumn, schools in England will be required to help keep uniform costs down. Under new Department for Education guidance, they'll be instructed to remove unnecessary branded items. Schools will also have to make sure second-hand uniforms are available. I'll have more on all of those top stories for you at the top of the hour. See you then.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. You're watching To The Point on GB News with Anaya Falarin Iman and me, Patrick Christie's. We've got a show with all of those biggest topics, all of the best guests and everything to get you going this Friday. So here's what's coming up.
Absolutely. Well, Home Secretary Priti Patel has launched a fresh wave of attacks in the EU over the migrant crisis. Yesterday, it was reported that French police officers were standing and watching migrants setting off on the beach in Calais.
Yes, indeed. Well, meanwhile, Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama says that he will never receive any refugees for richer countries after Dominic Raab confirms the government is looking at processing asylum seekers abroad.
Yeah, strong words. Well, fury continues to grow amid the acts of the east leg of HS2, but the Prime Minister says the new rail plan is a monumental achievement.
I mean, that's putting a spin on it, isn't he? There we go. We might have had enough of lockdowns and social restrictions, but Germany is considering tighter measures before this Christmas. Could it actually happen over here, then?
Indeed, we have all of this coming up and much more across the programme. To get in touch, make sure you get in touch at gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, Patrick gives his views on lockdowns across Europe.
Lockdowns are sweeping across the continent as Europe becomes, well, the sick man of Europe. Cases have been spiralling, but there is a concerning element to the increased restrictions, i.e. that various political leaders are now floating the idea that vaccines alone are not enough to combat COVID. There is a worrying ease with which various continental political leaders have effortlessly decided to create a two-tier society. In Austria, the unvaccinated are under house arrest. That's about 2 million people. That includes a lot of young people who may well already have some form of natural immunity, but it also includes people who just simply cannot take the vaccine for whatever reason. So it's not just vaccine refuseniks who are being barricaded inside, it's also people who just physically can't have the jab. Their justification for this is that about 65% of Austria's population is fully vaccinated, which is one of the lowest rates in Western Europe. Meanwhile, the 7-day infection rate is more than 800 cases per 100,000 people, which is one of the highest in the region as well. Germany is also locking down the unvaccinated in certain parts. Greece is banning them from any indoor spaces, many public spaces as well. Latvia, where 59% of the population are fully vaccinated, reimposed lockdown last month, and get this, has banned lawmakers who refuse the vaccine from voting on laws and taking part in debates until the middle of next year. They will also have their pay docked. Now, it's worth noting that as things stand in this country, our government hasn't ruled out increasing restrictions. In fact, Sajid Javid is still holding Christmas to ransom. How can that be the case? How can it even be a question that we would increase restrictions? Last Christmas was a bit of a washout, to say the least, wasn't it? But hardly anybody in the country was vaccinated. The jab had only just been invented, and only the extremely vulnerable and frontline NHS workers had really been offered it. We knew less about the virus. We were more scared of it. We, as a nation, were much more vulnerable. But we're not there anymore, are we? We're on to the booster jabs now. We've got vast swathes of antibodies coursing through our veins. We know more about ventilation being a key line of defence, and crucially, we've all had a year and a half to get our heads around what's happening and make our own minds up about whether or not we want to celebrate Christmas together with friends or family. We have to be allowed to make our own decisions. There seems to be a worrying trend among some politicians who've never been presented with an opportunity or an excuse to exercise as much control over people's lives as they do now. To feel as though that they know best, that we're all just helpless idiots who, if it wasn't for the nurturing hand of some suits from regional government, we'd all be wandering around wearing loincloths, fighting each other for what scraps of food remain outside a burning Aldi store. Just look at what's happening in Australia. Dictator Dan Andrews, as I like to call him, Premier of Victoria, who is in favour of internment camps surrounded by electric fences, which is something that's worth noting, I think, and who talks to people like they're all idiotic school children. I've said it before, I'll say it again, it's the role he was born to play, because he looks like a failed geography teacher whose wife's just left him. Until someone invents a better vaccine, or other medical treatments as well, this is as well protected as we can possibly be from COVID. Cases are down, deaths are down, hospital admissions are down. There is no need whatsoever for this country to introduce measures like other European nations. Some members of our government and medical community seem to think that we need saving from ourselves. I think perhaps we need saving from them. Well, yes, there we go.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I went to Amsterdam last week and had a great time.
I imagine.
And and then days later, it was announced that it's gone into lockdown, and they absolutely now have a show your papers society. I mean, I went to a gig and I had to show 4 different documents just to get in. One of them was a vaccine passport in the hotel. every single time I wanted to go into breakfast, I had to show a vaccine passport. And I just don't think we've even realised the level psychologically and societally of the mission creep that we have accepted. From the 2 weeks to flatten the curve to a society which is, unless you accept a medical intervention, but even if you have had that, then you still cannot go back to normal life. So even if you're vaccinated, you have to show your papers to do basic things in life.
Absolutely. And look, I obviously bang on fairly regularly about what I would regard as being an infringement to our civil liberties in this country. But when you hear things like that and you look at some of the cases that I've just rattled off there about continental Europe and about Australia, for example, I mean, even parts of America, actually, you know, actually, we're quite lucky in the grand scheme of things over here at the moment. We genuinely are, even if it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah.
We really, really are. But I think, as Inez rightly said there, it's that mission creep, isn't it? And what I'm concerned about, one of many things I'm concerned about, is that once other countries start to do it, it almost legitimises it. Oh, well, come on, we're only copying what's going on in Europe. And then that seems to be the line that's parroted, in my opinion anyway, by a lot of the media as well. Well, hang on a minute, Germany's doing this. Why can't we do it? Why shouldn't we be doing it?
And it is fascinating. I mean, the pressure that Sweden was under at the beginning of the pandemic, who decided to do something that was very culturally and societally specific, you know, they were demonised on the international stage. And many medical officers in Sweden still believe that they took the right path. And I think, you know, many people may well agree with them. But I at this point, I just don't see how it has anything to do with actually something medically or scientifically necessary. It has just become an increased mindset within many political leaders that the way that you now govern society is through threats and through, you know, harsh kind of punishments, essentially.
Yeah, and I do think as well, it's slightly less so in this country because of the way the decisions are made. They do tend to come from central government and obviously certain elements of the top tier medical community. But, you know, in other parts of the world, like Australia as a case point, you do end up with people who, in my opinion, you know, lacks maybe the requisite talent or political skill or nous or intellect maybe to get right to the very top in their nation. So they end up in regional government. And now all of a sudden, these people who basically might not have been household names in their own homes before the coronavirus started, have now got loads of power in their hands. And I question whether or not they're of the calibre to actually wield that power. And I also question whether or not they've got the taste for it now, you know?
And I think, you know, a lot of the politicians, and I've seen it in Austria and other countries, well, they'll say, well, you know, the public, you know, overwhelmingly support this. Well, there's two things. One, there's never been a proper debate about this. There's been a demonisation and censorship of people that even question anything in relation to it. And on top of that, I don't necessarily think, you know, medical interventions and the restrictions of our liberty should be just dependent on you know, the sways of polling. You know, that's not a authoritative measure to decide what we should do in the future.
Well, look, get in touch. Let us know what you think about this. GBviews at gbnews.uk. A few of you have already been in touch. Thank you very much. We'll go to those shortly. Just discussing whether or not you are now a little bit worried. We're seeing what's happening in Austria. If you're just joining us, 2 million people under house arrest, essentially. Parts of Germany, similar setup if you're unvaccinated. You've got Latvia, of course. You've got Greece, for example, imposing some restrictions on unvaccinated people and just other people in general. Are you worried now that it's going to come our way? And if it does, how would you feel about that, you know, certainly vis-a-vis Christmas?
And just very quickly, you know, the amount of people that are unvaccinated in Austria, like I watched an interesting interview and some of those people, totally reasonable, they will still not get the vaccine out of principle. Not because they're against vaccination or they're, you know, opposed to whatever. It's because out of principle, they do not support what the government's doing. So it's interesting to see how long this is going to go, this kind of tug of war, essentially.
Yeah, will it go the other way? Which I think was something you were alluding to there. You know, there's a lot of people. I spoke to someone in Austria actually quite recently, and they said, you know, the more the government pushes it, the less inclined they are to do it. There is, of course, a school of thought out there, and no doubt there'll be many of you watching this now thinking, just get the vaccine, just shut up and get the vaccine. And look, that's a view, isn't it? Of course it is, but there's another civil liberties and bodily autonomy element to it as well, isn't there? So there's very much two sides to that particular coin. GBviews at gbnews.uk.
Totally. Well, after the break, we'll take a look at Priti Patel's comments where she suggests that EU's open borders are to blame for the migrant crisis.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Yes, morning everybody. Now very shortly we're going to be talking about what Priti Patel has had to say regarding the EU and open borders and how that's led to what's going on in the Channel. But I just wanted to go to a bit of you first early on, so keep those views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. I opened up there on some of the news that's coming out of continental Europe, which is basically lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. And so, Patrick, surrender the government's sovereignty over your own body, the only thing you really own, and then you surrender your last vestige of freedom. That's from John. He's obviously not very happy about the idea, anyway, that what's been happening there. Politicians have been drunk on power. That's from Gary, and there's a theme here. But yes, go on.
No, it's interesting. I think as well, I think disproportionately people that are unvaccinated are people from poorer communities, people from migrant communities. So you are literally effectively creating a two-tier society where there'll be pockets of people in society that are unvaccinated or only had the single jab, and they're concentrated and they are essentially isolated from the rest of society. I think that's a really worrying road we're going down.
Yeah, but well, Billy's very worried about it as well. Welcome to the medical Stasi, he says. So yeah, so look, keep those views coming in, everybody. Essentially it is, are you fearful that the kind of lockdowns and the restrictions that we're seeing on continental Europe now are going to come our way as we essentially run up to Christmas, I suppose? What are your thoughts? GBViews, gbnews.uk.
Indeed, well, the Home Secretary has blamed the EU's open borders for the migrant crisis. Speaking to Washington DC yesterday, Priti Patel said migration had been made worse by free movement of travel. She added that the Schengen Agreement, which got rid of borders among member states, had from France overwhelmed the migrants trying to reach the UK. Her speech comes as the Times reported on Thursday that the UK government had hoped to strike a deal with Albania whereby migrants who had arrived to Britain's beaches would be taken to the country whilst the week to be processed.
Well, Downing Street said that all countries had a moral responsibility to tackle the migrant crisis. The Prime Minister's official spokesman said, "We think that all countries have a moral responsibility to tackle the issue of illegal migration and protect lives."
Well, right now, let's speak to the immigration lawyer, Harjit Bangar. Thank you so much for joining us, Harjit. I mean, what do you make of this? Do you think that we all have a moral responsibility to share the load of the different people coming in? Or should we be focusing on what the migrants want? If they want to go to a particular country, then they should be accepted. What do you think?
I think we have to look at it in the round, and we have to stop, dehumanizing these people. People move. And I think we have to realize, that that's their prerogative to move. Now, the method in which they move, that's at debate here. We can't tell to people, right, you've just got to stay in this country. Sorry, you're not allowed in 2 hours. We already accept, a fair amount. However, we do accept a low amount in comparison to countries like Germany, Austria, Italy, Spain, France. So we've got to realise we're not really being invaded as we are made out to be. So we're in charge of our own borders now. We have been for a while, and it's up to the politicians to deliver what they promise. And in the fact that they're promising something and they're not delivering, that's just seems to be the story so far.
Yeah, so I mean, I wouldn't use the word invaded. I don't necessarily think that language is always responsible, but there is a reality that many thousands of people now this year, more than the entirety of the year last year, are coming into this country. They're often applying for asylum, and many of them may well be economic migrants. And there is an increasing sense amongst huge sections of the British public that we are not controlling our borders, and there is a sense of a loss of control, and the government is promising to do something about it, but they're not doing anything about it. So, what do you make of that? That it's not necessarily about an invasion or anything like that. It's just a mere question of being able to control borders.
Exactly, and that's the rhetoric around this conversation. We do hear words like invade, flooded, overwhelmed, taking our jobs, and all of that rhetoric that we hear. We've got to realise migration is going up because of the situation the world's in. Look at the situation Belarus is in. Obviously, migration is going to happen. If your house had been ransacked and raided and your children were murdered and you're fleeing with them, of course you're going to move. You're not going to stay there and say, right, I'm going to go down in my house. So I think the fact is, it's down to the politicians. Brexit has been happening for a while. What have they negotiated in relation to borders? If they're saying that EU aren't cooperating, well, it's not our job, the viewers' job, to make them cooperate. It's the MP's job. What have they been doing? They haven't been doing their jobs. They've got nowhere with it. And now they're trying to blame the EU by saying, oh, well, they haven't controlled their borders. Well, the EU's been borderless for years.
I understand all that. And I think just something that you alluded to earlier, I think, was just a sense of, I suppose, human duty, as it were, really, to people that are naturally going to move, and migration, etc., etc. And look, I understand all of that, of course I do, but I think a lot of people might say as well, we have a human duty to people who are already here. We're coming up to Christmas now, and there'll be about 7,000 homeless military veterans on the streets. There'll be a lot of people, homeless generally, really, including in some cases just children. Whereas I think some members of the British public might have an issue with the idea that someone who's just arrived on a dinghy can have a roof over their head in a hotel this Christmas Day, whereas some veterans, for example, might not be able to.
It's not the fault of the migrant that they get put up in hotels.
It's not it is. But I think it's. I'm saying people might want our politicians to do that, to handle that differently. Really, do you not think?
Yeah. I think that duty to house everybody. So the failings of this government, that they're failing to house our veterans, failing to keep them off the streets, failing to help the homeless, that shouldn't be blamed on somebody who's coming in, who's seeking refuge from us. It's a failing of the person who provides it. We shouldn't finger point. It's not the migrant that's stealing a roof. So what we've got to realise is we've got to blame the politicians here, and we've got to help them out. As for people who are already here, there's 1.5 million people living illegally already in the UK who've been living here for up to even 15 years. Off the radar.
Stay, then?
Now, instead of chasing them around and spending 10 grand to 100 grand trying to get them out of the country, they haven't got permission to work. Wouldn't it be wiser if we brought them all in on a yearly visa and said, right, come and pay tax, take the jobs, take the care home jobs that are at the moment that we need, take the lorry driver jobs that we're doing, that they're willing to do, train them up and have them help our country? Why don't we make immigration work for us as opposed to us working for immigration? We've got these people here. Bring them into the system. Let them pay tax. We're not going to give them permanent visas. Let's have a situation where we say to them, you can't claim any benefits. You have to pay for your own NHS. You're responsible for yourselves, own rent. You're not going to get anything free, but work and pay your tax and contribute to the country. I guarantee those 1.5 million people would come into the fold, would boost this economy, and would take all of these jobs that the British people can't do, are unwilling to do, or don't seem to be able to fill, and the shortage occupation jobs.
I mean, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. Could it encourage illegal immigration?
There's a lot there.
I think some people are shouting at their TV sets at the moment. But I'm very sorry, because I wish I could talk to you about this all day. We've got to go over to the headlines and the weather shortly. But thank you very much. Make sure you come back on and we can thrash it out again. Immigration lawyer there, Harjat Bangar. well.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, Boris Johnson, he supported an amnesty for illegal migrants when he was Mayor of London. But yeah, keep all of your thoughts coming in on this, GBviews at gbnews.uk. I'm sure that many people are going to have strong views on this particular subject, but plenty of stories coming up, but first, after the break.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again, good morning. A change in the weather takes place this weekend with colder and brighter weather arriving from the north. But for today, it's more of the same. A mild start, a lot of cloud in the sky. One key difference today is I think there'll be a bit more sunshine in a few spots compared to yesterday. But overall, we've still got this very mild, blustery westerly breeze. Weather fronts still affecting northern Scotland to bring more persistent rain here, and that strong wind continuing to bounce over the hills of northern England as well as Scotland. So wet and windy for northern Scotland throughout much of the day. Cloudy skies elsewhere, but a better chance, I think, compared to yesterday, for example, of some cloud breaks. For example, central and eastern England, and perhaps even a few cloud breaks there. Some sunshine for northeast Scotland, eventually Northern Ireland, parts of northern England. We'll get the cloud breaks. 15 or even 16 Celsius is possible, so very mild once again, 13s and 14s elsewhere. But it's going to feel unpleasant under that persistent rain for the north of Scotland. I think Shetland largely avoiding the rain through the day, and then into the evening the rain edges a little bit further south at times, but overall it sticks there in the far north. Cloudy skies elsewhere, the cloud increasing overnight, and with that cloud cover once again it's a mild night, 8 to 10 Celsius typically tomorrow morning. But it's a wet start for northern Scotland. That persistent and in places heavy rain continues for the first few hours, then it starts to push south. It arrives into Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland by lunchtime, so turning wet here. But as the rain sinks south, it also becomes less heavy. It becomes a bit patchier, and it clears so that later in the afternoon, Scotland and Northern Ireland sees brighter skies with a few blustery showers turning up and feeling colder while it stays cloudy and fairly mild in the south. That rain, though, does clear through all areas on Saturday night. It clears to much brighter skies, many places seeing sunny skies on Sunday, but with a few showers, particularly near coasts, and it will feel colder.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews at gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning, everybody. You're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christies, and the wonderful Anaya Falarin Iman. We're here all the way through until midday with a show, as ever, full of all of the biggest discussion points. And actually, from what I'm seeing in my inbox at the moment, loads of you are already getting involved. We love to see.
Indeed, we'll make sure you get in touch with your views as usual. gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be reading that out throughout the show. But first, it's time for the latest news.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. This is your news at 10:03. A 13-year-old boy is in a critical condition after being shot in the back in Birmingham. West Midlands police say it happened in Hockley Circus just before 7 last night. His injuries are described as life-changing. An investigation is underway after 2 women and 2 children died following a house fire in south-east London. Firefighters were called to the property in Bexley Heath at around 8:30 last night. The victims were rescued from the first floor, but all died at the scene. A man who got out before firefighters arrived was taken to hospital.
We were about to buy this property, and as the house needs improvement or renovations, to my knowledge, very little knowledge, I thought it needs a complete changing of the wiring.
COVID booster jabs are being added to the travel pass. Millions of people who've had 3 doses will be able to prove their status with the NHS app from midday. It means people can visit countries where vaccinations are only valid for a certain amount of time without having to quarantine. The government wasn't fully prepared for the wide-ranging impacts of the pandemic and failed to learn from simulation exercises. That's according to a new report. The National Audit Office says there were no detailed plans on shielding, job support schemes or school disruption. It also found that crisis planning had been limited, with most of the government's emergency resources focused on mitigating a no-deal Brexit.
You go through simulations, but nothing prepares you for what happened here. This was what was called a novel pathogen. That meant that no one really knew what it was. No one expected it to come. And when it arrived, we didn't really understand its transmission. I mean, it's only recently, really, we've got into this sort of airborne transmission understanding and the importance of ventilation. So I don't think we were prepared for that.
British troops are being deployed to Poland's border with Belarus to help tackle the migrant crisis. 100 military engineers will provide practical support and work to reinforce the perimeter. Thousands of people have been gathering along the border in freezing temperatures over the last few weeks. The EU has accused Belarus of deliberately creating the crisis, which Minsk denies. UK retail sales rose by 0.8% in October, boosted by early Christmas trading. It ends a 5-month run of falling or flat sales. The Office for National Statistics says second-hand items, toys and sports equipment sold particularly well.
Maybe some of that second-hand stores as people thinking a little more environmentally about their purchases. There was also solid sales for clothing and footwear. As people are starting to go out a little more, as the economy continues to open up further. And in fact, it's interesting that UK footfall is the highest of any of the major EU economies and higher than the US, which is, a really refreshing figure to see at the moment.
Drivers will be banned from holding their mobile phones from next year as part of a government crackdown. The Department for Transport says the changes will make it easier to prosecute drivers using their device at the wheel. Anyone caught will face a £200 fine and 6 points on their licence. Drivers will still be able to use their mobile phones for satellite navigation if they're secured in a cradle. From next autumn, schools in England will be required to help keep uniform costs down. They'll be instructed to remove unnecessary branded items under new Department for Education guidance. Schools will also have to make sure second-hand uniforms are available. And a rare copy of the US Constitution has sold at auction.
Looks like congratulations are in order to your bidder. The bid is yours for the United States Constitution at $41 million. Sold $41 million.
With auction fees, the final bid on the first edition printed copy totaled $43.2 million, more than double its estimate. The buyer, though, remains unknown. You're right up to date. I'll have the latest headlines for you in half an hour. Now it's back to Patrick and Anaya with To The Point.
Good morning, everybody. You're watching To The Point on GB News with Anaya, Falarin, Iman and me, Patrick Christie's. And we've got a show full of all of those biggest topics, the biggest guests and everything to get you going. And really, it already has massively kicked off in the inbox over what's going on in the channel. So we'll go to those shortly. But also just some breaking news, actually. Since we've come on air, which is worth noting, we're going to get stuck right into this. Austria has brought in a national lockdown along with, get this, mandatory vaccination from February. Plus, Germany is also considering tightening its measures as we head towards Christmas. Austria will now become the first country in Western Europe to reimpose full coronavirus lockdown. And of course, that big one there, mandatory vaccinations. Where do you stand on that?
Indeed, 2 weeks to, or 3 weeks to flatten the curve. But anyway, anger over the Axis theme leg of HS2 continues to grow as Boris Johnson was accused of a betrayal. Furious MPs accuse him of broken vows and causing generations of pain by downgrading flagship plans for levelling up rail in the north.
A turkey shortage, is there? Well, some poultry producers are hiring extra staff in the run-up to Christmas. Our reporter Ellie Costello has been to a turkey farm to find out how prepared they are. She was disappointed, actually, because she thought we were sending her to Turkey, and in the end, she just ended up in the cold British countryside.
Well, we have all that coming up and much more across the programme, so make sure you get in touch with your views as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Well, Alex Hales, the English cricketer, has apologised for blacking up to impersonate Tupac Shakur at a 2009 New Year's Eve party. The England and Wales Cricket Board and Nottinghamshire has launched an investigation over a picture which showed Alex Hales posing as the late rapper. In a statement, he said, "The theme was musicians and Tupac and was and always will be my favourite musician, so I went as him. Obviously, I realise this is incredibly disrespectful and I want to apologise for the offence this has caused. It was incredibly reckless and foolish on my behalf, and I apologise for that, and apologise to the club for the embarrassment it has caused them. I deplore all forms of racism and discrimination." Wow. I think this story is really, really interesting. I mean, we've had the recent conversations around what's going on in cricket, and then it was a culture of racism that's been accused of, essentially, and then it's now been revealed that Azim Rafiq has also made anti-Semitic comments in the past. We heard about Ollie Robinson, earlier this year. And this whole offence archaeology, which is essentially just trolling through decades of what people have said and done in order to attack them or undermine them or tarnish their reputation in the present day. I really worry about it. I think about young people. When you're young, you don't know what all of the societal norms are. You make jokes, you say things, and you can find out.
And you get things wrong sometimes.
Exactly, you get things wrong. We're not allowed to get things wrong anymore because of social media and what people do. I think it's gone way too far.
Yeah, and I can remember when that Ollie Robinson thing happened. I'm sure many of you remember it as well. And the reams of England cricketers, right, who were obviously trawling through, or presumably had some media manager who was trawling through, potentially, a decade or whatever, of any tweet that they've ever done, just in case something that they might have tweeted in jest 10 years ago, right, is not acceptable in today's standards. Quite possibly wasn't acceptable at the time, let's be honest, but we were in a situation, potentially, where we were fronting up to the idea that England's greatest ever fast bowler, Jimmy Anderson, might never play for this country again. What happens if all of a sudden we've got, our opening batsman on the eve of the Ashes Test or something, and it turns out that when he was 15 years old, he tweeted something a bit fruity while he was having some banter with his mate. Do we sack him?
But even Azim Rafiq, I just think that actually just shows, and I think it's a very different thing to the thing that he accused the cricket club of, but even just what's happened, it does show that actually we are all flawed, we all make mistakes, and actually constantly demonising and tarnishing people for what is minor slights and errors, I think we are going to create a generation that are anxious, paranoid, and actually have no voice.
Well, let's just say we're obviously dealing in hypotheticals here, because the one key difference between what Azim Rafiq put in the conversations where he made some anti-Semitic remarks and some of the allegations that he's made is that we can absolutely prove the ones that he's made that are anti-Semitic. We can't really, as it stands anyway, massively prove some of the allegations that he's made. I've got no reason to disbelieve him, by the way. I'm not sitting here saying that. But I am saying that there's an element of proof there. Well, if we forgive Azim Rafiq for the anti-Semitism, well then, if a Gary Ballance of this world or someone from Yorkshire Cricket Club comes out and goes, you know what, I'm really sorry, I got it wrong, it was years ago. David Lloyd came out and said, I'm very sorry, Bumble. Well, we've got to forgive them as well, haven't we? We can't have it both ways. We can't continue this death spiral of cancel culture.
Yeah, I think as a society we have given up on moral virtues, and I think that there's things that are above politics, and that is, you know, compassion, forgiveness, duty, and I think we need to actually enliven the meaning of being moral people more than whatever political views that you have. So,
yes, OK, well, there we are. Strong stuff. Look, loads of you have been getting in touch. We are going to go to your views shortly. I know Anaya's been trawling through them and picking out some of her favourite ones. We had a lot of you getting in touch about a guest that we had on earlier on, who's an immigration lawyer, who floated the idea that potentially we should almost have an amnesty for the, roughly speaking, about 1.5 illegal immigrants that we've got in this country at the moment. That way, then maybe they'd be more able to contribute to our economy, to pay tax, etc. And it's fair to say not a lot of you are in favour of that idea.
yeah, I mean, I'm very sympathetic. You know, when we actually look at illegal migrants, for example, I think, you know, many of them have actually been there for over 10 years. They've got families. They've actually been working in the black market, but they're being excluded from wider society. And actually, what really happens is they get pushed into destitute situations. You know, drugs, prostitution, and living an underground, underbelly society. And I do think that I think we definitely should be controlling our borders more generally. But I do think we have to consider that the huge impact of over 1 million people in this country living here with no papers and no status.
I would worry that it would encourage illegal immigration. I mean, it's already being encouraged quite drastically by what's taking place in the Channel. I would be concerned about what message that would send out.
But it's got to be coupled with a range of policies. So I think as part of that would be actually being much firmer and stronger or quicker in processing. The processing time for some of these applications is just ridiculous.
But I think one of the major issues that we would have with this is actually, if we do want to give an amnesty to people, they'd have to tell us exactly who they are. They'd have to tell us exactly where they've come from. They'd have to tell us everything. And they may not always have been that honest about it. We know as a tactic that they often arrive in Dover without any papers and this, that and the other. Well, you know, if we want to give them an amnesty, they'd have to be very, very honest about where they've come from and exactly who they are. And that's a view that Philip has outlined as well.
I just read quite a funny GB Views by Carl Sager. People need to stop apologising. Hasn't anyone seen White Chicks?
That's true, actually. That is true, actually.
That's a good film. Yeah. These two black guys.
I was obviously deeply offended by that. As a white man.
Blonde white women.
Oh, barely a day goes by that I'm not absolutely mortified by what's happened there, you know.
Well, moving on. Anger over the axed eastern leg of HS2 continues to grow as Boris Johnson has been accused of betrayal. The Northern Powerhouse rail link from Manchester to Leeds will also be downgraded.
Yes, well, furious MPs accuse him of broken vows and causing generations of pain by downgrading flagship plans for levelling up rail in the north. Well, we can go now to Brendan Chilton, who's the Labour councillor and the chief executive of the Independent Business Network. Thank you very much, Brendan. This doesn't look a lot like levelling up, does it?
I'm afraid it doesn't. And of course, we've got to remember there's a whole range of associated issues that come along with improving rail infrastructure. You know, you get the support industries around the rail, tend to get more commuters, which means more spending power in local communities as well. And so I can understand why a lot of Conservative MPs that now represent red wall seats, and indeed Labour MPs and devolved mayors, are quite angry by this, given the promises that were made just under 2 years ago for the type of investment that was outlined. It was a lot different to what's currently being delivered.
But Brendan, you know, are we really surprised about all of this? I mean, even Boris Johnson in 2019, he recognised that you know, the Red Wall lent him their vote, and there was always this sense that actually he never really understood the needs of that area, and he couldn't really live up to the expectations of real economic and infrastructure regeneration in those areas. So, you know, is this just almost inevitability?
Well, as a Labour councillor, you would expect me to say, yes, absolutely, it's inevitable that the Conservative Prime Minister will fail to deliver. But actually, I think a lot of people, while he did secure a lot of votes in the Red Wall on the premise of getting Brexit done, of course, there are still issues with that in Northern Ireland, there was also this big commitment to level up those parts of the country that have had underinvestment and frankly don't pay their way as compared to other parts of the country as well. Now, if you look at where we are at the moment, the British economy is having severe problems with inflation. That's only expected to get worse. There are supply chain issues as we've come out of the pandemic. But the government response to that has been higher taxes, lower growth, and no real plan for getting our economy back on track. We hear a lot from both the Conservatives and from Labour about levelling up and making more in this country. Well, where's the industrial strategy and the plan for manufacturing in this country?
Yeah, Brendan, well, some of our viewers have been sending in tweets from Keir Starmer from back in 2016, voting and opposing HS2. I mean, it's all well and good criticising Boris Johnson, but where's Keir Starmer's big vision for economic transformation for the Red Wall? We're still waiting.
No, I don't disagree. I think both the government and Labour really have got to have a hard think about how we get that big growth in the British economy, because at the moment we're forecast to be essentially in a decade of stagnation, where we could actually see in real terms living standards fall rather than go up. And at a time in the world where you've got increasing authoritarian regimes and all these other great challenges that amidst all that, countries like China appear to be doing well. Now, what does that say to the rest of the world? That an authoritarian dictatorship where there is no freedom is doing far better in terms of their economic growth than the West. Just jumping on the point about Keir Starmer, I have been critical, but I'd like to be fair at the same time. I think when he made those remarks about High Speed 2, that was several years, High Speed 2 going up to the north, that was in his capacity as a constituency MP. And of course, anyone that knows central London realises that where the train is proposed to come in is going to be massive disruption, particularly along the Euston Road. But now he's leader of the Labour Party. He's taking a decision based on what is the national interest, and that is, of course, to improve connectivity.
Yeah, there are huge knock-on effects. Unfortunately, we haven't got time to get stuck into all of them at the moment, Brendan, but there are huge knock-on effects as well. Compulsory purchase orders that have been dished out, people who've already sold their businesses, people who've already sold their houses, people who would have sold their houses for a much higher rate or their businesses for a much higher rate had it not been about to have the face carved out of it by a railway line that is now not going to exist. But anyway, Brendan, thank you very, very much. As always, my good man, Brendan Chilton there is a Labour councillor and Chief Executive of the Independent Business Network.
Just quickly, we are getting so many GB views. I just want to mention on that blackface question, quite a few people have been asking about Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister. Why haven't we cancelled him? So that is a good question. Is there a double standard when it comes to these issues?
Massively so, massively so. I mean, that guy's done it more often than I've had hot dinners, and I've had a lot of hot dinners. But anyway, there we go. After the break, Head of Counter-Terrorism Policing, Matt Jute, said the vast majority of those plotting terrorist atrocities are British-born and raised, and not asylum seekers. We'll be getting stuck into all of that.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again, good morning. A change in the weather takes place this weekend with colder and brighter weather arriving from the north. But for today, it's more of the same. A mild start, a lot of cloud in the sky. One key difference today is I think there'll be a bit more sunshine in a few spots compared to yesterday. But overall, we've still got this very mild, blustery westerly breeze. Weather fronts still affecting northern Scotland to bring more persistent rain here, and that strong wind continuing to bounce over the hills of northern England as well as Scotland. So wet and windy for northern Scotland throughout much of the day. Cloudy skies elsewhere, but a better chance, I think, compared to yesterday, for example, of some cloud breaks. For example, central and eastern England, and perhaps even a few cloud breaks there. Some sunshine for northeast Scotland, eventually Northern Ireland, parts of northern England. Where we'll get the cloud breaks. 15 or even 16 Celsius is possible, so very mild once again, 13s and 14s elsewhere. But it's going to feel unpleasant under that persistent rain for the north of Scotland. I think Shetland largely avoiding the rain through the day, and then into the evening the rain edges a little bit further south at times, but overall it sticks there in the far north. Cloudy skies elsewhere, the cloud increasing overnight, and with that cloud cover once again it's a mild night, 8 to 10 Celsius typically tomorrow morning. But it's a wet start for northern Scotland. That persistent and in places heavy rain continues for the first few hours, then it starts to push south. It arrives into Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland by lunchtime, so turning wet here. But as the rain sinks south, it also becomes less heavy. It becomes a bit patchier, and it clears so that later in the afternoon, Scotland and Northern Ireland sees brighter skies with a few blustery showers turning up and feeling colder, while it stays cloudy and fairly mild in the south. That rain, though, does clear through all areas on Saturday night. It clears to much brighter skies, many places seeing sunny skies on Sunday, but with a few showers, particularly near coasts, and it will feel colder.
Canary Islands, sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning, everybody. Now, Head of Counter-Terrorism Policing, Matt Jukes, has said that the vast majority of those plotting terrorist atrocities here are British-born or raised and not asylum seekers. This comes after Priti Patel claimed the suspect in the Liverpool bomb attack was able to exploit Britain's dysfunctional asylum system to remain in the country.
Well, the Home Secretary was criticised after she said the system was a complete merry-go-round with a whole industry devoted to defending the rights of individuals intent on causing harm.
Well, Robert Clark is from the Henry Jackson Society, and he joins us now, I believe. I think he's there, is he? Yeah, there we go. That's good. Right, Robert. So look, this probably is true, isn't it? That the vast majority of people plotting terror attacks in this country are probably British-born and bred. But that's not to say that our asylum system isn't also broken.
I think both statements need further clarification, to be fair, to be properly understood. The asylum system claim itself, the asylum system is broken. There's tremendous backlog with the Home Office. This is a well-known fact. Unfortunately, when people fail their asylum claims, like the Liverpool attacker on last weekend, it's notoriously hard to then evict them and move them on in that sense. And it's incredibly easy once you fail an asylum claim to appeal it and reappeal it, so you can have that that continuation of stay. So that's what happened, obviously, with the Liverpool attacker. Regarding the nature of the domestic terrorism threat more broadly, I think some important information needs to be sort of considered. Around 70% of disrupted attacks are still Islamist-inspired. You know, whether that's from Al Qaeda or Islamic State, for example, that inspired Wahhabi Islamist ideology. Only 30% of disrupted attacks are from the far right, which is more what the general public imagine to be sort of like that domestic British sort of terrorist threat. Just to put that into perspective, one of the reasons for this is there's still a huge disconnect between the British far right movement, for example, and the far right extremism, for example, that we see for that led to the death of Joe Cox. There's a huge difference between that and any international organisations or any links to any international inspired terrorist organisations, as opposed to the Islamist threat. We still see, we see a resurgent Al Qaeda, Islamic State aren't really going away, and crucially, their messaging, their propaganda, and their disinformation is allowed to permeate across the internet and radicalise online incredibly vulnerable people in Britain and across Europe. And one of the instances we've seen of that is obviously through the lockdown restrictions imposed. It's led to enormous radicalisation of people online who have been vulnerable, left at home, isolated throughout lockdowns.
And Robert, I mean, it doesn't really give the public much confidence when the Home Secretary is saying that we have a fundamentally broken and dysfunctional system. I mean, she's been overseeing that for quite a number of years, and the Conservative government have been in power, since 2010. So isn't that just really damaging for public trust and confidence if the person that's overseeing it and has the power to change it thinks it's broken and dysfunctional?
I mean, absolutely. The first thing Priti Patel needs to do is actually adhere to the Select Committee's report on the refugee system, which was from spring last year, and it's still not been. Some of those policies still haven't even been addressed, let alone put into practice. That would actually take some of the backlog off the asylum claims. We can see already just how much is building up. We're leading into winter, and traditionally it's going to be busier. We saw it was only last Thursday, over 1,000 migrants landed in Kent. And then they have to go to London, they get processed, and they go to dissemination centres across the UK, which puts a tremendous strain on local housing authorities and social services. So this system's only getting worse.
Sorry, Rob, just to interrupt you, it's a cracking point that you've made there, but it puts a tremendous strain, more often than not, on housing authorities up north. They don't move them into Kensington, do they?
I mean, I'm from Nottingham, and one of the great things actually about Nottingham is it's an incredibly multi-ethnic, diverse population, and the refugee community is actually incredibly integrated, and there's not many problems. Nottingham's a really good example of how integration can be done right, but it's a huge strain on Nottingham's local council and, like I said, the local housing authorities, and we see this across not just obviously in London, but across the north: Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Wigan, Wolverhampton. It's a tremendous problem. Never really gets enough attention, unfortunately.
Well, thank you so much, Robert Clark, from the Henry Jackson Society. A really important discussion that I'm sure we're going to be revisiting in the coming months.
Yeah, I think we'll return to that. Ina and I will discuss that later on, because this idea of, all right, okay, well, maybe it's true that the vast majority of terror plots in this country are from people born and raised here and not from asylum seekers. That's fair enough, but it still doesn't mean our asylum system isn't broken. And also, it just points to various things there. You mentioned integration, you mentioned a load of stuff.
Well, I think that's a really key point about integration. I think, the fact that we've got so many homegrown people that want to destroy this country, I mean, that is just really unbelievable.
Yes, OK, well, look, we're going to be discussing all of that. Keep those views coming in. But a little bit of breaking stuff for you this morning. Get this, ladies and gents. Austria heads back into a national lockdown. But could this happen here? They're also going to enforce mandatory vaccinations. But first, here's the news.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. Here are the latest headlines. An investigation is underway after 2 women and 2 children died following a house fire in Bexley Heath in south-east London. The victims were rescued from the first floor, but all died at the scene. COVID booster jabs are being added to the travel pass. Millions of people who've had 3 doses will be able to prove their status with the NHS app from midday. It means people can visit countries where vaccinations are only valid for a certain amount of time without having to quarantine. The Austrian government will announce a full lockdown of the country starting on Monday. Some 2 million people who are not fully vaccinated against COVID-19 have already been forced to go into a lockdown as the country faces a massive surge in cases. There's now also a legal requirement to get vaccinated from the 1st of February of next year. Austria registered 15,000 new cases in the last 24 hours and still has one of the lowest vaccination levels in Western Europe. Joining us now is Dr. Charles Levinson, who is the Chief Executive of Dr. Call. The government wasn't fully prepared for the wide-ranging impacts of the pandemic, according to the new report by the National Audit Office. It also found that crisis planning had been limited, with most of the government's emergency resources focused on mitigating a no-deal Brexit. 100 British military engineers are being deployed to Poland's border with Belarus to help tackle the migrant crisis. Thousands of people have been gathering along the border in freezing temperatures over the last few weeks. The EU has accused Belarus of deliberately creating the crisis, which Minsk denies. The England and Wales Cricket Board will meet with 18 first-class counties today to discuss equality in the sport. It follows Azim Rafiq's allegations of institutional racism. Teams are being asked to sign a 12-point action plan to improve diversity and inclusion. From next autumn, schools in England will be required to help keep uniform costs down. Under new Department for Education guidance, they'll be instructed to remove unnecessary branded items. Schools will also have to make sure second-hand uniforms are available. I'll have more on today's main stories for you at the top of the hour. See you then.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Well, families with children receiving free school meals in Darlington will receive £30 supermarket vouchers to help with food and fuel costs during the autumn half-term holiday. It comes after Darlington Borough Council was awarded more than £900,000 from the government's Household Support Fund. Funding has also been awarded to local services called The Bread and Butter Thing, which is a community hub selling food at heavily discounted prices.
Well, this is to ensure that families not eligible for vouchers have somewhere to go for support. Well, our North East of England reporter Rachel Sweeney went along to Red Hall School in Darlington to hear about the funding that could change Christmas for many.
This is Red Hall Primary School in Darlington. There are 228 pupils here, 60% of which are eligible for free school meals. So they are directly affected by the Household Support Fund. Joining me now is Councillor John Clark to tell us more. Councillor, you have a bit of a soft spot for this school, don't you?
I do, actually, I do. As I say, there's probably about 130 pupils in this school that what we've done as a council will help through the winter months. The £30 voucher is going to be so crucial to them coming through the Christmas holidays, the half-term holiday after Christmas and also into Easter.
Now, I do have to ask you, 60% is not 100%, so what about the other families?
Well, the household support grant has been split into different areas of support of how we're going to manage it. The vast majority will go to free school meals for children that are eligible. However, there is a part of what we're putting aside which will help the bread and butter thing, which is a widely used service in Darlington. So we're hoping to really sort of ramp up the marketing on that to get more customers through the door on the bread and butter thing. But it does two things. It not only helps with household costs of food, but also predominantly the no food to waste landfill. because this is food that ordinarily might well have been discarded by supermarkets, so it's a win-win situation with that.
The bread and butter thing is a fantastic idea. So people go there, it's a little bit like a food bank. You pay £7.50, you get 3 bags of shopping, and that is a lifeline to so many families here, much like this £30 supermarket voucher.
Yeah, it is. And there's added a strand as well, because we have kept some money aside for fuel vouchers as well. So we're really conscious about families that are just on that borderline of needing support. So hopefully with utilising the bread and butter thing and the fuel vouchers, it will be able to help those families.
Now 60% of the kids here are eligible for school meals. £30 is a lot of money that's going towards their families. You usually hear about 10 or maybe £20, but 30 is a significant amount of money. That's a life-changing for some people.
It is, and that's per child. So, a lot of families have 2 children, 3 children in fact. So, you're talking a substantial amount of money there that will really help them through the school holidays. Because, as in normal school term, places like Redolf provide such fantastic meals for the children. So when they're on holiday, it just provides that extra bit of support so that they get nutritional meals.
We just walked through the school hall there while they were all having their school lunch, and it's great to see them smiling, something that they don't have to worry about, because children shouldn't be worrying about that.
No, they shouldn't. And really, it's the families that shouldn't be worrying. So, if the families aren't worrying, then the children won't have that kind of anxiety either.
And on a personal level, how does it feel to have achieved this, to be able to tell families that there is support for them?
I'm immensely proud of what we've been able to do. Obviously, when we got first wind of this government funding money at the council, it was I think it was about a week before the October half term. So we acted really, really quickly, and I'm so proud of the council officers and the education teams that have been able to pull it together so quickly for half term. So it gave us a bit of breathing space then to think of how best to manage the rest of the money, and this is the scheme that we've come up with. So I'm absolutely over the moon.
And so will the families be too. Food on the table this Christmas here in Darlington.
Oh, right, we're back, apparently. There we go. Rachel, thank you very much. Rachel Sweeney there. Just reporting on that situation, which I think is good. Sense of community.
Yeah, and I mean, you had the government, removing the £20 universal credit uplift, which has had a big impact on many families across the country. So it is good to see that, community organisations and things like that moving in to ensure that people are not left behind.
Especially around Christmas time. Everyone deserves to have a happy Christmas, don't they? Right, we're going to delve into the terrifying, shocking world of my inbox now. GB Views, GBNews.uk. Just bear in mind as well, ladies and gents, shortly we are going to be talking about a developing story that's coming into us literally since we've came on air, actually. I was actually delivering a monologue earlier on the state of civil liberties in Austria whilst they announced then they were going to introduce mandatory vaccination. So it's almost like they were trying to silence me. But no. So look, just to whiz you through this before we go to some of your views, Austria will enter a nationwide lockdown for a maximum of 20 days from Monday, but they are also going to mandate vaccines. They're the first European country, one of the first in the world, to impose compulsory coronavirus vaccination. That sounds pretty sinister, but I think it's what they've not said that sounds even more sinister to me, which is they've not said how they're going to enforce this or what the punishment will be if you don't comply. So lots of unknowns there, but anyway, I suppose they've got until February to pick through that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to be one of those people that, almost do a reverse fear-mongering type of thing. But actually, it does seem like this is how we become more and more authoritarian, where we slowly just accept things, the goalpost gets moved, and then you wake up one day and, you can't leave your house unless you've taken about 10 different injections.
Yeah. Well, this is it. And I mean, if people just don't comply, what happens? Do we end up with scenes of people having their front doors kicked in, strapped down, jabbed? Do they get taken off somewhere?
You really have to ask now, what is it that makes us different to countries like China? We've always prided ourselves on being a free, open, liberal, democratic society, and where people have free choice over their own bodies and what they say. And you now have to really ask that what makes us different, really? And I ask that as a very serious question.
Just going to go to, well, here we go. There's one on this already, actually. Susan's getting in touch. Thank you, Susan. Mandatory vaccinations. Is the world becoming communist? It looks like our civil liberties are gone again. And, it does look a bit like that, doesn't it? A lot's reaction as well to a discussion we were having earlier on, which is Priti Patel, well, the head of security in this country now, saying that actually a lot of the foiled terror plots are from people who were born and raised here. It's not from asylum seekers. Yeah, OK, fair enough. Of course, that does still mean that the vast majority are still Islamist-inspired terror plots, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we still can't say that our asylum system is broken. Lots of you have been getting in touch in that. It's all very well and good for Priti Patel to dissipate the terror the UK has received, but I'm sure attacks are still going to be imported. And I think that's what's from Terry, and I think that's really in response to, frankly, the ISIS playbook, isn't it? Which is they have at some points literally kind of funneled people into Europe, and they've gone on to commit attacks, like the Bataclan, for example.
Yes, well, we will continue to speak about this. Well, just to reiterate, the Austrian government will announce a full lockdown on the country starting from Monday. Some 2 million people who are not fully vaccinated against COVID-19 have already been forced to go into lockdown as the country faces a massive surge in cases.
It does indeed. Now, there's also a legal requirement to get vaccinated from the 1st of February 2022. Austria registered 15,000 new cases in the last 24 hours and still has one of the lowest vaccination levels in Western Europe. But could this happen here? That's what we're going to be asking. And joining us now is Dr. Charles Levinson, who is the Chief Executive of Dr. Call. Thank you very, very much. Well, let's just see. Obviously, this is a developing story, and it's changed since we've been on air. Is there any way, shape or form, do you think that in this country we might have any kind of increased restrictions, i.e. a lockdown, or any form of mandatory vaccination?
I think not. I very much hope not. I think we're in a very different place to Austria, thank goodness. We came out of lockdown early in the summer, and there's a exit surge in cases when you come out, and so we intentionally came out in the summer when we knew we'd be able to cope with that. So we are in a much better position now. We've had a we've got one of the best vaccination rates in the world, and we've got over 90% of people now have antibodies, and we are doing pretty well. And we mustn't forget the adverse consequences of lockdown. It's not a free alternative. My particular interest is clearly in the health adverse consequences, all the excess deaths in the home, and something we see on the ground at Dr. Call, cases of people who have not received medical attention when they should have done, or late diagnoses, and that it is absolutely essential that we remain open.
Yeah, Dr. Levinson, what happens when everyone is vaccinated and we still have a rise in cases next winter? Is there at some point that we just have to accept that the level that COVID is with us perhaps for a time that we don't know about? Is this something that we have to now accept from the part of political leaders, that lockdowns is going to be part of our winters every year?
I think lockdowns can't be part of our... We can't afford to go on having lockdowns. And apart from the economic consequences, we are seeing so many problems coming from them. So we had, and the fear factor is the real thing, and even restrictions raise that fear level. So we have doctors who are afraid to see patients, and patients who either are afraid to go into hospital, or who feel that they need to protect the NHS and save scarce resources, and don't understand how serious their situation is. And we do home visits, and we at Dr. Call, we had a patient recently who was having a heart attack. Now, we wouldn't normally go and see someone who was having a heart attack. We'd get them to dial 999, but he slipped through the net because he talked down his symptoms, and the doctor got to him and said, I believe you're having a heart attack. For your survival, you need to get to hospital immediately. And the chap wouldn't go. And he ended up not going. An ambulance was called in the end, but he still wouldn't go. So these consequences of restrictions and lockdown and the fear they raise are so significant that I just think this is something we have to accept. We're going to live with, and there are better treatments becoming available. There's more and more immunity, and I think we will cope perfectly well without any more.
Yeah, and look, we're dealing in hypotheticals now, and I appreciate that. But how would you feel, in terms of your own level of comfortableness, as it were, if we were told that vaccines were mandatory, right? So like Austrian doctors are now fronting up to, presumably. They're going to have to front up to an idea that from February, they're going to be told to administer mandatory vaccinations. There will be people there, and there are people there, who are refusing to take this vaccine as their own personal choice, whether people think that's right or wrong, whatever, that's the case. How would you, as a medical professional, feel administering essentially a forced vaccine?
We couldn't, and it would be completely wrong. I think it's a complicated issue. In certain situations, vaccination is particularly important. So, for the at risk should be strongly encouraged, and conspiracy theories, anti-vax conspiracy theories, should be challenged. We doctors and nurses and so on have long been used to a requirement to have a vaccination for various things. If we want to work as a doctor, we need to have a hepatitis B vaccination and so on. So I think it's that for healthcare professionals, that's one thing. But I think for anyway, it wouldn't be mandatory. It would be job related in that situation. But to go beyond that is completely wrong. Apart from being an infringement of civil liberties, it also raises the whole conspiracy theory argument and makes the situation worse.
Well, thank you, Dr. Charles Levington, who's Chief Executive of Dr. Call.
Yeah, good stuff that, I thought. Strong stuff, actually, and it's interesting to hear it. And, of course, that is a developing story. If you are just joining us, Austria is going back into another full national lockdown. They're also going to make it mandatory for citizens to have a vaccine from February.
Yeah, and it's actually just great to see a doctor that's passionate about civil liberties as well. Yeah. That's a very nice thing to see.
Convinced. I'm fascinated in a very morbid way, anyway, to see what's going to happen in Austria now, because they are going to be confronted with a situation where there are currently 2 million people unvaccinated. Now, let's just say, and I'm completely spitballing here, I don't think it's unreasonable, that probably about 1 million of those, that's a personal choice, right? At least. I would have thought that.
And many of them have had the first jab. So actually, it's just those that are not fully vaccinated.
So what happens now? Do you end up in a situation where these people have to be strapped to a bed and a doctor has to administer a jab? Not great. But we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Just very quickly, what I also don't like is the sense that some people are almost happy about it. Like, you can even... There's one thing to say, you know what, we're in a unique situation and sometimes you have to do difficult things, but some people are like, yeah, get them. And I just think, that's not really...
Yes, well, shows a worrying underbelly of society, doesn't it? But we've got an action-packed show for you today, ladies and gents, because we've just learned, apparently, some new information on the Liverpool bomb attack that occurred 5 days ago. So, for the details now, our very own Home and Security editor Mark White joins us. Mark, thank you. What's going on?
Well, some details about the makeup of that device now being released by counter-terrorism police, confirming that the bomb was made of homemade ingredients, but it was packed with ball bearings that, if the bomb had fully detonated, would have melted and acted as shrapnel. Now, the police say they're under no illusion that had this fully detonated, especially inside the hospital, there would have been significant injuries and loss of life. Thankfully, the bomb ignited early and only partially detonated. We believe that the primer, the main detonator, exploded, but that main charge didn't detonate. In terms of the actual detonation and why it detonated early, the police are not discounting that was completely accidental. They believe it's possible that actually the movement of the taxi, especially at the point where that taxi suddenly stopped, as we saw from the hospital CCTV video there, may have jolted it and caused it to ignite, and accidentally and prematurely. Thankfully it did, so there were few injuries really, apart from the taxi driver, who was badly shaken and slightly injured, as he got out of the front of that vehicle just after the detonation. In terms of the ongoing investigation and the interviewing of witnesses, the police have also confirmed that they have now spoken to Emad al-Swilmin's brother. They spoke to him last night, and he has been able to give them some valuable insight into the early years of this 32-year-old and also his state of mind in the months before this attack took place. So still very much, as you can hear, a fast-paced investigation. Every day new details coming out in this terrorist inquiry, which of course the authorities say could have been so much worse had that homemade bomb detonated as intended, packed with these ball bearings, which would have acted as deadly shrapnel.
It doesn't bear thinking about, does it? The what could have happened, what could have been, and it adds an even more sinister, wicked, disgraceful layer to this guy's actions, doesn't it? The fact that he just packed it full of ball bearings for maximum potential damage as well. Mark, thank you very much for bringing us the latest on that, and obviously we'll go to Mark again with any more developments. Mark White, our Home and Security Editor there. Goodness gracious me, terrible, eh?
No, it's terrifying the more details you hear of it, and it's the second terror-related incident in the UK in just a few months. I mean, what kind of society are we really going down?
Yeah, no, exactly that. And I think, I always hark back to the Manchester Arena bombing. I mean, obviously I'm from kind of that neck of the woods anyway. I remember that evening and the unfolding events very, very vividly. And I've been in that arena numerous times. I've been in that arena as a child, actually, to see concerts similar to the one, like those, let's be honest, mostly of those children there were there to see Ariana Grande. And, it's just, to see that this could have been even worse. The guy's in a maternity hospital, I mean, anyway, I better not because I'll start swearing probably, but anyway. GBViews at gbnews.uk, and the range of views is coming in about the mandatory vaccination situation in Austria. Congratulations to Austria. COVID is seriously out of control there, and proper action is required. Hopefully the lockdown will work. That's from Robert. Thank you very much, Robert. And then the email immediately above that. Austria making vaccines mandatory is the most extreme communist mandate ever seen in Western Europe. So there we go. They've pretty much made it legal for gangs of police to forcefully pin someone down and insert something into their bodies. So that's from... No name on that one anyway. But so the range of views is there, isn't it?
Well, make sure you keep all of your thoughts coming in. Email gbviews at gbnews, or make sure you can tweet us as well. We'll be back with many of the top stories and plenty to talk about right after the break.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again, good morning. A change in the weather takes place this weekend with colder and brighter weather arriving from the north. But for today, it's more of the same. A mild start, a lot of cloud in the sky. One key difference today is I think there'll be a bit more sunshine in a few spots compared to yesterday. But overall, we've still got this very mild, blustery westerly breeze. Weather fronts still affecting northern Scotland to bring more persistent rain here, and that strong wind continuing to bounce over the hills of northern England as well as Scotland. So wet and windy for northern Scotland throughout much of the day, cloudy skies elsewhere, but a better chance, I think, compared to yesterday, for example, of some cloud breaks, for example, central and eastern England, and perhaps even a few cloud breaks there, some sunshine for northeast Scotland, eventually Northern Ireland, parts of northern England. We'll get the cloud breaks. 15 or even 16 Celsius is possible, so very mild once again, 13s and 14s elsewhere. But it's going to feel unpleasant under that persistent rain for the north of Scotland. I think Shetland largely avoiding the rain through the day, and then into the evening the rain edges a little bit further south at times, but overall it sticks there in the far north. Cloudy skies elsewhere, the cloud increasing overnight, and with that cloud cover once again it's a mild night, 8 to 10 Celsius typically tomorrow morning. But it's a wet start for northern Scotland. That persistent and in places heavy rain continues for the first few hours, then it starts to push south. It arrives into Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland by lunchtime, so turning wet here. But as the rain sinks south, it also becomes less heavy. It becomes a bit patchier, and it clears so that later in the afternoon, Scotland and Northern Ireland sees brighter skies, with a few blustery showers turning up and feeling colder, while it stays cloudy and fairly mild in the south. That rain, though, does clear through all areas on Saturday night. It clears to much brighter skies, many places seeing sunny skies on Sunday, but with a few showers, particularly near coasts, and it will feel colder.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning, everyone. You're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and Anaya Falarin Iman. We're here for the next hour to whiz you through all of the biggest stories, and there's a lot to get stuck into today.
Absolutely. Well, make sure that you get in touch with your views, as usual, on gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be reading that out throughout the show, but first, it's time for the latest news.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. This is your news at 11 o'clock. Counter-terrorism police have confirmed that the bomb which exploded outside the Liverpool Women's Hospital on Sunday had been packed with ball bearings. Police have also spoken to the brother of the bomber, Imad al-Swailamin. Detectives are now examining the possibility that the motion of the taxi stopping suddenly may have caused the improvised device to detonate prematurely. An investigation is underway after 2 women and 2 children died following a house fire in southeast London. Firefighters were called to the property in Bexley Heath at around 8:30 last night. The victims were rescued from the first floor but all died at the scene. A man who got out before firefighters arrived was taken to hospital. COVID booster jabs are being added to the travel pass. Millions of people who've had 3 doses will be able to prove their status with the NHS app from midday. It means people can visit countries where vaccinations are only valid for a certain amount of time without having to quarantine. Austria will enter a full national lockdown for 10 days from Monday, and unvaccinated citizens were told to lock down last month. But Chancellor Alexander Schallenberg says nationwide restrictions are now needed to try to contain a 4th wave of cases. Students will have to go back to homeschooling, restaurants will close, and cultural events will be cancelled. The government wasn't fully prepared for the wide-ranging impacts of the pandemic and failed to learn from simulation exercises. That's according to a new report. The National Audit Office says there were no detailed plans on shielding, job support schemes or school disruption. It also found that crisis planning had been limited, with most of the government's emergency resources focused on mitigating a no-deal Brexit.
You go through simulations, but nothing prepares you for what happened here. This was what was called a novel pathogen. That meant that no one really knew what it was. No one expected it to come. And when it arrived, we didn't really understand its transmission. I mean, it's only recently, really, we've got into this sort of airborne transmission understanding and the importance of ventilation. So I don't think we were prepared for that.
British troops are being deployed to Poland's border with Belarus to help tackle the migrant crisis. 100 military engineers will provide practical support and work to reinforce the perimeter. Thousands of people have been gathering along the border in freezing temperatures over the last few weeks. The EU has accused Belarus of deliberately creating the crisis, which Minsk denies. A Croatian lorry driver has been jailed for 6 years for attempting to smuggle cocaine with a street value of £1.6 million into the UK. Predrag Gojic was stopped at Dover's Eastern Docks in May with 20 kilograms of cocaine hidden inside reels of paper. He told officers he planned to take the drugs to Leicester for a payment of €10,000. Ryanair has confirmed plans to delist its shares from the London Stock Exchange. The company says high costs and low numbers of trades were behind the decision. Brexit also played a significant role, pushing EU stock ownership below 50%. After December the 17th, Ryanair will solely be listed on the Euronext Dublin Exchange. UK retail sales rose by 0.8% in October, boosted by early Christmas trading. It ends a 5-month run of falling or flat sales. The Office for National Statistics says second-hand items, toys and sports equipment sold particularly well.
Maybe some of that second-hand stores as people thinking a little more environmentally about their purchases. There was also solid sales for clothing and footwear. As people are starting to go out a little more, as the economy continues to open up further. In fact, it's interesting that UK footfall is the highest of any of the major EU economies and higher than the US, which is, a really refreshing figure to see at the moment.
From next autumn, schools in England will be required to help keep uniform costs down. They'll be instructed to remove unnecessary branded items under new Department for Education guidance. Schools will also have to make sure second-hand uniforms are available. I'll be back with the latest headlines in half an hour. Now let's return to Patrick and Anaya and To The Point.
Morning everyone, you're watching To The Point on GB News with Anaya Florinaman and me, Patrick Christie's. We've got a show full of all of the biggest stories and there really is a lot going on at the moment, so we'll try to do the absolute lot of it for you.
Yes, well, Austria has been brought into a national lockdown alongside mandatory vaccination from February, plus Germany is also considering tightening measures. But as we head towards Christmas, could the UK also be doing the same?
Yeah, concerning stuff that coming out of Austria at the moment, to say the least. Now, a deal struck between the UK and Ukraine. We'll see what could go wrong here. We'll see warships and missiles sold to the country amid rising tensions with Russia as Defence Secretary Ben Wallace signed a treaty with Ukraine last week. He asked what could possibly go wrong with that.
And is there a turkey shortage with some poultry producers hiring extra staff in the run-up to Christmas? Our reporter Ellie Costello has been to a turkey farm to find out what is going on there.
That's making me so hungry looking at that. Anyway, we have all of that coming up and much, much more across the programme. You get in touch as always, lovely people, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Well.
Yes, so a new Met Police policy on handcuffing tells officers to ask themselves 44 questions before arresting a suspect and details the procedure in a child-style ABC guide. The mammoth decision process is laid out in full in this new 25-page document published by Scotland Yard. So the questions include things like, what could go wrong? What could go well? What is happening? What do I not know? Other advice to mull over includes, do I need to take action immediately? And what would the victim or community affected expect me to do in this situation? I think there's really just one question that needs to be asked here. Why is Met Commissioner Cressida Dick still at her job? By the time officers have run through all those questions, the criminal will be in a different postcode. They'll already be burgling the next house. This list of ridiculous questions will put doubt in the mind of police officers right at the very moment when they need clarity and certainty, i.e. mid-arrest, mid-confrontation. I can see it now, can't you? The bobbies on the beat, hauled before a tribunal after arresting someone. So, officer, are you actually admitting that during the course of detaining that machete-wielding drug kingpin, you didn't ask yourself question number 25, which clearly states that you have to consider if there is any research evidence on this matter? That's actually question number 25, by the way. Is there any research evidence? It comes after question 24, which is what legislation might apply. You would have thought that might be up there towards the top, but anyway. And before, naturally, question 26. If decision-makers have to account for their decisions, will they be able to say they were proportionate, legitimate, necessary and ethical? Hardened criminals are going to be laughing at this, aren't they? Also featured is an alphabet-themed guide to handcuffing that warns to always ask the suspect if the cuffs are too tight. So there's even a primary school-style guide for police officers when it comes to this kind of stuff. So it's an ABC. So check this out. A, apply the handcuffs. B, be sure to ask the subject if they're too tight. C, check the handcuffs for tightness. D, double lock the handcuffs. E, evidence. Tell the suspect why they're being handcuffed. And then they presumably just sit around in a circle and sing nursery rhymes before deciding which one takes the school hamster home for the weekend. I mean, this stuff is just absolutely bonkers, isn't it? A lot of this has come about as a result of anger amongst certain ethnic groups over the rate of stop and search. So, there were 558,973 stop and searches carried out in the year to March 2020. This is, of course, under the new PACE laws. Well, not the new PACE laws, the ones from 1984, ironically, actually. And in England and Wales, that is. So according to the Home Office figures, that's that. Just 13% of those, of that year's stop and searches, led to an arrest. That's down from last year's 15%. So the increase in stop and searches was larger for white people in 2021 than it was for black and Asian and other ethnic minority people as well. But BAME people were stopped at a rate of 4.1 times higher than those who were white, which is a similar rate to the previous year. This is according to that same report. And the rate of black people who were stopped and searched per 1,000 of the population was at its highest since 2014. That was at 54, compared with 35 in 2014. So, this is the highest number of stops and searches as a whole since 2013 and 2014, but it's still below the peak of 2010 and 2011, where you essentially couldn't move for being stopped and searched. Now, there could be a few explanations for this. One is that the police force is institutionally racist. Well, I don't particularly buy that myself. I think there will be racist police officers. There are racists everywhere, aren't there? But I don't genuinely believe that there's a racist core right at the very heart of our police force. There are, unfortunately, various socio-economic factors that can lead to people, especially from a new immigrant background, living in some areas with higher crime rates, greater deprivation, etc., as they make the first step on their route to a better life and future. This can lead, naturally, to more stop and searches. Now, it's a very difficult job being a police officer. They won't always get it right. There will be bad police officers. There'll be thick police officers. But there'll also be brilliant ones. I don't think that we should infantilise them. I'll say it again. Perhaps instead of Cressida Dick getting her police officers to ask 44 questions before nicking a thug, she should, instead, be questioning her own position. I'm quite keen to get your views on something, which is this element of the dissatisfaction among certain elements of the BAME community, as it were, about stop and search. What are your views on it?
I'm generally, broadly in favour of it. I mean, for example, if I go to an airport, I don't like the fact that we all have to be checked. But even if it's 1% of contraband or weapons that are stopped, that may well stop a terror incident or moving goods that are illegal to other countries. I actually think that the way that it's done in airports is a bit over the top. But in the UK, actually the fact that some percentage, quite a significant percentage, still leads to arrest is quite stark. And I think that generally speaking, is removing knives, removing violent weapons off the street. So I think this idea that police are just randomly going to stop people, I think there may be an element of it, but overwhelmingly they are acting off of intelligence, they're acting off of reports, and they are moving in that is necessary. And I think speak to those that have lost family members in violence, whether or not they support stop stop and search.
Yeah, well, that's it, isn't it? Look, obviously the views are already coming in. Really, is this actually happening? No wonder we're in such a tragic situation on every level. We're actively asking suspects if it's OK to arrest them. That's from Tony.
Well, one thing that I'll just quickly say on the stop and search, though, Peter Hitchens, interestingly, recently said that he thinks that the whole police force should effectively be disbanded and started again. And I have a lot of sympathy. The police seem to have forgotten what their purpose is. They're policing tweets and often not the streets. The sense of community policing, you get police drafted off into areas that they know nothing about using a sat-nav because, they live 50, 60 miles away. I do think there are big questions about the nature of policing and the nature of the loss of community policing that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, massively. Certainly the loss of community policing is huge, and especially in rural areas as well. I mean, when I lived up in Cumbria for a little while, I think I'd go weeks without seeing a police officer. I mean, it doesn't fill me with confidence, to be perfectly honest with you. The idea that someone could get mugged in the street or something like that, and the chances of bumping into a bobby on the beach seemed pretty slim, to say the least. Here we go. Yes, as well. Someone's getting in touch here as well. Rambo saying the lawyers are rubbing their hands here. Here comes another payday. And I think this is it, isn't it? What I'm concerned about, apart from all of it, really, is the idea now that if a police officer doesn't, at some point, right, ask themselves all of these 44 questions when they nick someone, and someone, takes them to a tribunal or whatever, how easy is it now for the lawyers to go, well, you see, you didn't follow that guideline, did you? Question number 25, question number 30. Meanwhile, this bloke's out there with a machete. It's just, anyway, madness.
It does seem very peculiar, the layers of bureaucracy that are being added to the police. I mean, now they're even increasingly closing the non-university pathway. They're saying that police officers need to have university degrees. I mean, I just don't see why we need academics as police officers. I just find it quite odd.
Yes, yeah. You can imagine being arrested by a philosopher. But anyway.
We just need them to be able to do the job.
Yes, we do indeed. Right, thank you very much for everyone's views. They're coming rolling in thick and fast. Just a couple of other quick ones, just to topic-wise for you. We did announce earlier on that Austria has now got mandatory vaccinations. It's going to implement mandatory vaccinations from February. That's getting a lot of you very worked up. Also, Priti Patel blaming the EU's open borders for what's taking place in the Channel. Again, lots of you getting in touch on that, so keep those views coming in. We'll go to them a little bit later on. GB Views at gbnews.uk.
Well, Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin has said there is serious intent to solve the Northern Ireland border issues currently ongoing due to Brexit. That's as Lord Frost, the European Commissioners Markos Sefcovic meet to try and find a resolution.
Well, Sefcovic has also said there is a recent change of tone from the UK government, and there is hope serious action could follow. So this positive turn comes after months of disputes and setbacks, but finally, could both parties actually be on the verge of a breakthrough? Well, for more on this, of course, only one man we could possibly ever go to. So our Northern Ireland correspondent, Dougie BT. Dougie, thank you very much. A lot of noise coming from both sides now, finally. And does it look like we might be able to actually see progress, do you think?
I don't think so. I think move along. Nothing to see here. It's exactly the same we heard as last week. The rhetoric had dropped. The EU saying it's OK. Micheál Martin, the Irish Taoiseach, saying that the language was good and everything seemed fine. They're looking after pharmaceuticals. We reported on that 3 weeks ago. The problem being with this, of course, is that the EU, and this might actually play into all of this for Lord Frost, the EU, we've just heard about it, has had to ask for troops to come from Great Britain to bolster a border in Poland to enforce an EU border, while a lot of people here are saying that EU is trying to annex part of the UK. Now, that could play well. Dublin, although have talks, like the politicians here, most of those decisions are being made between London and Dublin. Here has not, or London and Brussels, sorry, Dublin and here have no skin in the game, if you like. They're not there. It doesn't matter. They're told what actually is going to happen. Now, the DUP has a lot of political credibility riding here because they have said to their voters here, if this protocol was not sorted out by the 1st of November, they were going to pull these institutions down behind us and cause an election. That might look good on paper, but Sinn Féin, and you've got to admire Sinn Féin politically, they have played a fantastic game. They signed the 1998 Good Friday Agreement and they did not see that as a settlement. They saw it as a stepping stone towards United Ireland. The Unionists saw it as a settlement. Sinn Féin, as much as they sit here and they govern, they see most of their political future now in Dublin and on an all-Ireland basis. And that's what's really getting to the social problem here. The European Courts of Justice getting their way over Northern Ireland isn't going down well here, especially with unionists. So I don't think it'll be tomorrow, I would say, before the politicians here in Northern Ireland examine the minutiae of what has actually gone on in those talks. But to be truthful, looking from the outside in, not an awful lot seems to have changed in a week of intensive talks.
Fantastic stuff, Jiggy. Expertly done, as always. We would expect nothing less, of course. Jiggy Beattie there in Northern Ireland, whizzing us through the process that's unfolding out there. I thought it was a fascinating point there that he made about the fact that we're now deploying troops to the Belarusian border, aren't we, with Poland, to try and help out. Now, it's amazing, isn't it? Because there's a continent full of different countries there, and you would have thought that maybe between them they'd be able to muster up enough of a military defence themselves. But alas, no, here we are, Britain to the rescue. And so, does this mean now that we've got a bit more leverage when it comes to what's going on in Northern Ireland?
Well, we hope so. It's such an important issue that is ongoing for over a year now, and it needs to be fundamentally resolved.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. Well, a deal struck between the UK and Ukraine will see warships and missiles sold to the country amid rising tensions with Russia. It's really kicking off, isn't it? As Defence Secretary Ben Wallace signed a treaty with Ukraine last week.
Yes, under this treaty, the Ukrainian government can access financing for contracts with UK suppliers to help beef up its naval capabilities. Well, let's speak to Sir Andrew Wood, Associate Fellow of the Russia and Eurasia Programme and former British Ambassador to Yugoslavia. Thank you for joining us, Sir Andrew Wood. I mean, what do you make of this situation?
Well, the situation overall is Russia putting enormous pressure on Ukraine by amassing troops and so on at the border again. I don't think that necessarily means that they're about to let them cross the border and so on. It would certainly be very foolish of them to do that because it would lead to a significant armed conflict. And it's not at all clear what other countries would do as a result of that. It's certainly a vital point for us that Ukraine should preserve its independence. That said, the Ukrainian armed forces need to increase their power to match the power that the Russians have managed to amass over the last several, almost decades. Going along with
how do you think Vladimir Putin might react to this, though? Because that's kind of what matters. Will he see this as a provocation?
Well, he can see whatever he likes. And if he wants an excuse as a provocation, then he will take it. But I do not think that is so, that it is a provocation. It's not intended for that, and it's got some background. But Putin has his own problems with this because the amount of force he's used on his own population does secure his rule at present, but trust in him and regard for him within Russia has fallen. The last time he received on Russia applause was when he seized Ukraine. So it's possible that he intends to military action. It certainly wouldn't be justified by the fact we have sent some support to Ukraine, or that the United States has, or for that matter, that the EU has been supportive, generally speaking, of Ukraine.
Yeah.
So I think the initial question...
Yes.
I'm sorry.
No, sorry to interrupt. It's just we're a little bit pressed for time. I just wanted to get your infinite wisdom on another issue that's taking place in and around that part of the world at the moment. It's what's going on the Belarusian border, certainly with regard to Poland. And my understanding is that we've been asked to send some troops over there. We just did a piece there about how that may potentially give us a bit more leverage when it comes to the EU vis-à-vis Northern Ireland. Just in terms of just the realpolitik of the situation, I suppose, on the ground there at the border, how do you see that panning out? Because it doesn't really seem to me like it's going to go away anytime soon, does it? I mean, Belarus aren't going to just, keep them in there indefinitely. It certainly doesn't look like Poland's going to let them in. Do these people just freeze to death in a forest?
No, I think, first of all, you have to keep it in some sort of proportion. I think we would have 150 people helping them with securing a better border. It's not as though we're sending troops to fight on their behalf or to fight against Belarus. Secondly, the problem that Poland faces is an essentially artificial problem insofar as Belarus has imported migrants in order to try to force them over the border into not just Poland, but also Lithuania and Latvia and even eventually, I suppose, Estonia. So it is an attempt by Belarus to force the hand of the EU as a whole. And that also has implications for our own ability to deal with or bring proportion into the migrant problem that we too have.
Fascinating.
I don't think it's in itself dramatic.
Yeah, fascinating stuff, and we will be keeping everyone updated with the developments on this story. Thank you, Sir Andrew Wood, Associate Fellow of the Russia and Eurasia Programme and former British Ambassador to Yugoslavia.
Yes. You know, you can just tell sometimes when someone's so knowledgeable about a particular topic, can't you? So it's great to have you on. Thank you very much for that. Well, we've had loads of your views coming in. It's possibly one of my most emailed into shows, actually, as far as I can tell. We've had a lot of stuff going on. There's the issue, of course, on the border with Belarus, who sent some troops over there. Could we be seeing a better relationship when it comes to between us and the European Union when it comes to Northern Ireland? Austria's got mandatory vaccinations, or it will do in February. That's really kicked off. A large part of Western Europe now is going back into some form of lockdown or restrictions. Could it come our way? GBviews at gbnews.uk. Lots to get you going. But after the break, we will be asking. In fact, we're going to go to Austria. Fantastic. We're going to find out about this mandatory vaccination programme. We're going to go live to an Austrian journalist. But first, it's the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again, good morning. A change in the weather takes place this weekend with colder and brighter weather arriving from the north. But for today, it's more of the same. A mild start, a lot of cloud in the sky. One key difference today is I think there'll be a bit more sunshine in a few spots compared to yesterday. But overall, we've still got this very mild, blustery westerly breeze. Weather fronts still affecting northern Scotland to bring more persistent rain here, and that strong wind continuing to bounce over the hills of northern England as well as Scotland. So wet and windy for northern Scotland throughout much of the day. Cloudy skies elsewhere, but a better chance, I think, compared to yesterday, for example, of some cloud breaks. For example, central and eastern England, and perhaps even a few cloud breaks there. Some sunshine for northeast Scotland, eventually Northern Ireland, parts of northern England. We'll get the cloud breaks. 15 or even 16 Celsius is possible, so very mild once again, 13s and 14s elsewhere. But it's going to feel unpleasant under that persistent rain for the north of Scotland. I think Shetland largely avoiding the rain through the day, and then into the evening the rain edges a little bit further south at times, but overall it sticks there in the far north. Cloudy skies elsewhere, the cloud increasing overnight, and with that cloud cover once again it's a mild night, 8 to 10 Celsius typically tomorrow morning. But it's a wet start for northern Scotland. That persistent and in places heavy rain continues for the first few hours, then it starts to push south. It arrives into Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland by lunchtime, so turning wet here. But as the rain sinks south, it also becomes less heavy. It becomes a bit patchier, and it clears so that later in the afternoon, Scotland and Northern Ireland sees brighter skies, with a few blustery showers turning up and feeling colder, while it stays cloudy and fairly mild in the south. That rain, though, does clear through all areas on Saturday night. It clears to much brighter skies, many places seeing sunny skies on Sunday, but with a few showers, particularly near coasts, and it will feel colder.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
GBviews at gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Yes, morning everyone. Thank you very much everyone who's been getting in touch. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Loads of you really kicking off about what's going on in Austria at the moment. With,
I saw someone tweet it, I can't find it now, but someone asked, would we be taking refugees from Austria of the unvaccinated?
Yes, well there we are. I really can't get my head around why you would vaccinate someone if they're immune or if they're asymptomatic. That's from Stuart. Yes, and UK troops to Belarus as well. It said, it's a reality check, folks. We send troops to protect the Polish border, but seemingly we can't protect our own. And that's from Terry, and I suspect that's not an uncommon view, that, Terry. Look, excuse me, we're going to be going to more of your views a little bit later on. We've got an action-packed final half an hour for you. But first, it's time to get all of your latest headlines with lovely Rhiannon Jones.
I'm Rhiannon Jones. Here are the latest headlines. Counter-terrorism police have confirmed the bomb which exploded outside the Liverpool Women's Hospital on Sunday had been packed with ball bearings. They say it could have caused significant injury or death had it exploded in the way the bomber intended. An investigation is underway after 2 women and 2 children died following a house fire in Bexley Heath in southeast London. The victims are rescued from the first floor but all died at the scene. The fire is not thought to be suspicious. COVID booster jabs are being added to the travel pass. Millions of people who've had 3 doses will be able to prove their status with the NHS app from midday. It means people can visit countries where vaccinations are only valid for a certain amount of time without having to quarantine. 100 British military engineers are being deployed to Poland's border with Belarus to help tackle the migrant crisis. Thousands of people have been gathering along the border in freezing temperatures over the last few weeks. The EU has accused Belarus of deliberately creating the crisis, which Minsk denies. Drivers will be banned from holding their mobile phones from next year. Anyone caught breaking the law will face a £200 fine and 6 points on their licence. You're right up to date. I'll be back with more of today's main stories at the top of the hour. See you then.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Well, the Austrian government will announce a full lockdown of the country starting on Monday. Some 2 million people who are not fully vaccinated against COVID-19 have already been forced to go into lockdown as the country faces a massive surge in cases.
Well, there is now also a legal requirement to get vaccinated from the 1st of February 2022. It's the first country in Europe to make mandatory vaccinations a thing. Now, they registered 15,000 new cases in the last 24 hours and still has one of the lowest vaccination levels in Western Europe. Thankfully, we're going to go actually to someone who's on the scene, I suppose, as it were. Joining us now is health editor for the Austrian daily newspaper, which I will not try to pronounce, Martina Marx, who is live for us now from Austria. Thank you very much. I will allow you to announce to the nation exactly what publication it is that you work for, so I don't butcher it. But once you've done that, just tell us what the reality is like on the ground now. Mandatory vaccinations, who'd have thought it?
Yes, it was a discussion during the last few days here in Austria. Actually, we had it a few years back with, so I can't remember the name in English, but for a child's disease, actually. So we had mandatory vaccines, we know this. But with COVID, it's new, actually, yes.
Yeah, and
it will start a lot of discussions within our society, which is right now very, very split into pieces right now in Austria.
I recently watched a report on this by Unheard. I mean, there seemed to be almost a class divide in attitudes to mandatory lockdown. Do you agree with that at all, that there does seem to be some class distinction in relation to who is very supportive of the stronger measures and who doesn't in Austria?
Yes, and that's true. You could call it that, and it's probably because of how our recent government, our chancellor had to step down a few weeks ago, Sebastian Kurz, how he handled the crisis and how he handled the pandemic. He said actually at the beginning of the summer that the pandemic is over for all of those who are vaccinated, which was then false and is even more false now. So they didn't really try to get the news out about the vaccine. They didn't address skepticism. They didn't answer answers of people who people had about the vaccine.
OK, well, just on that now, the notion of it being mandatory vaccination compulsory vaccination from February 2022. Have they given any details on how they're going to enforce this? Are they going to be going door to door? How's it going to work?
I don't think they're gonna be going door to door, but though the required law which will set this in place is not yet formulated, so we're waiting on that. This will probably take a few days. What's really important right now is that we get the numbers down, because in parts of Austria, Salzburg and Upper Austria, we have really a crisis in the hospitals.
In the UK, there's been a growth of something called nudging, which is essentially that you make a huge claim of something, and then in order to instill fear or to nudge people to do different things. Do you sense perhaps this is one of those examples where they're claiming they're going to do things in order to encourage people very strongly to do something, but they may not actually implement it when the time comes?
What I know today, I think they will have to go through with it. There were a lot of situations where our politicians, our government said we will do such and such, and they didn't deliver on it. And I do think because the situation is so grim in Austria, they have to go through with this one.
OK, and what's the general public attitude like? Because, you know, I mean, to me, this just seems like a very, very, very authoritarian move. The Chancellor came out and said, oh, we wish we didn't have to do this. Well, you don't have to do it, you know. It does seem like a bit of a power grab, really, in a sense. And I just wondered what the mood was like for Austrians who maybe feel like they've lost control of their own bodies.
I do think that a part of Austrian society does really think that. Another part of Austrian society thinks differently and thinks we see the doctors and the nurses in the hospital. We had a situation at the beginning of the week where they had in one hospital so many deaths during one night they couldn't put them all in the morgue. So there is a grim situation, and I think there are some people who think, yes, this seems authoritarian, but there are a lot of people who think, well, we need to do something now to someday get out of this mess and end for sure this pandemic.
Tina, I mean, this idea that we have to keep doing something drastic. I mean, the vaccine programme originally was seen as that thing, and then now going back into lockdown, not just for the unvaccinated, which was already a shocking measure, for everyone as well. Do you not worry that it could continually be an excuse that we have to do something to which we then never, ever get our freedoms back?
This is a really hard question for me to answer, because I talk to experts and people who do the scientific work within the vaccine field and within the COVID field. And they have a very clear standpoint. The vaccines will help us to get out of this mess. Of course, this is a new virus. We have to learn with it. At first, we thought 2 shots will do it. Now we know we probably need 3 or even more in a matter of years or even a few months. Yeah. Nobody knows at this point. So it's a hard question to answer, and I probably am not equipped right now to do that.
I think it's great though, and it's fantastic to have someone who's actually, you know, on the scene, really, because obviously this news broke whilst we were on air this morning. So I was already, ironically, halfway through a monologue about civil liberties in Austria when it turned out that you guys had just announced this. So I was immediately out of date, which you hate to see. But no, thank you very much. Interesting stuff, and good luck with everything as well. It does. You know, it does sound like a desperate situation over there, so obviously keep well. Martina Marx of, I'm going to try it, Kleine Zeitung, which is, of course, an Austrian daily newspaper.
Kleine Zeitung.
Oh, there you go. Oh, well, there we go.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that I brilliant. Kleine Zeitung.
Well, as you can tell, I'm fluent.
I think, you know, it is a sad situation. Yes. I mean, just quickly, I mean, if you ask scientists or doctors what they think, you are going to get a very particular view. You might get the odd doctor that supports civil liberties that we had, but understandably, if you work in an industry, you're going to have one view, but decision-making has to take into account not just health, but also democracy, but also the economy, but also education. We can't have a society that's just a medical bureaucracy.
No. No, we can't. Absolutely. Hear, hear. Anyway, now, sticking with this, I suppose, should we make the COVID vaccination mandatory over here? Austria, as you just heard there, has decided to make it mandatory from the beginning of February. It's getting a lot of you very hot under the collar in my inbox as well. And here, frontline NHS and care workers will have to be jabbed unless they're exempt.
But should we make it compulsory for everyone? Well, joining us now to discuss is Dr. Andrew Preston, microbiologist at the University of Bath. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that we should be following suit of Germany and Austria, even perhaps New Zealand and Australia with these very stringent measures? Dr. Andrew Preston.
To be honest, no. We've always had vaccination as voluntary in the UK, and clearly that's the preferable route to go down. I think, actually the vaccination rates have been very, very high in this country and across Europe. I think just some countries are still obviously struggling in terms of the vaccination rates compared to others. I mean, we have a vast majority of the people in the UK that have received at least one dose. A great many of them have received 2 and are going on now to receive their boosters. So actually it's still been a great success. So if there are people that are genuinely still struggling to come to that decision as to whether the vaccine is safe or efficacious, and I think we just need to try and work out why we're struggling to put the case for vaccination to these people. I think there is a relatively small number of people that are ideologically opposed to vaccines, and I really don't think there's much we can do to change their minds in present circumstances. I think if you go down mandatory vaccination, you've got to then be prepared to follow through. So what happens then if people still refuse? Are you going to prosecute, take them to court? And a big concern, of course, is also we're not. You're laying a really difficult legacy for future pandemics, and I think it looks very likely that we're going to be facing something similar at some point in the future. Hopefully not too imminently soon. So what the decisions we make now with COVID are also laying the groundwork for how we deal with future pandemics. We need to tread very carefully on this.
Yeah, Dr. Preston, I mean, you're a scientist, a microbiologist, and we just heard from an Austrian journalist essentially saying that she doesn't feel equipped to comment on whether or not we can take certain measures because scientists that she's speaking to are saying a particular thing and she just wants to follow the science. I mean, do you think that's an appropriate way, though, to kind of run a country where we only listen to a particular viewpoint and don't necessarily take into account the whole other range of factors that are impacted by mandatory vaccinations, lockdowns? I mean, do you worry about the way in which that particular industry, that field, is being seen as a way to decide for the entirety of the country?
But I don't. Well, I mean, Austria's in a particular position, but I mean, democracy. And I'm not particularly well equipped to comment on political matters. So, I mean, the science is the science. Vaccinations will decrease the impact of the COVID virus on the population. That's the bottom line. Of course, that's the scientific advice that feeds into government. They will also be receiving an awful lot of data and opinion from the medical fraternity, because, of course, it's not just what's happening in the population. One of the big drivers for the decisions made in many countries and throughout the pandemic has been to try and keep the health service running and operable. And it seems very much that Austria is responding to that very, very imminent threat of a sort of meltdown of their health service. So, of course, government receive all of these streams, including all the counter-arguments to those, and it is therefore, it's the government's decision as to what path they take. And that is democracy. We elect our politicians to make decisions for us. And so if you don't like that, then the way to answer that is through the ballot box or through legal protest.
Absolutely. I'm just going to ask you a question. We had a guy who was, I believe he was a GP on earlier, so I appreciate not in this, exactly the same nature of the industry, but I think it's worth getting your views on this anyway. How comfortable you would feel, or otherwise, if we did have a system of mandatory vaccination in this country and people were refusing to do it? How would you feel if you had to vaccinate those people? Do you think you would be able to do that morally?
I'd be pretty uncomfortable, to be honest. Again, I'd like to think that the case of vaccination is so strong that we win the argument through the data. But of course, there are two sides to every argument. I'm just saying this to try and balance the view, not my personal opinion. But of course, there are plenty of things we're not allowed to do in society because of the impact it has on others, rather than just the person making that decision. You're not allowed to get behind the wheel of a car when you're over the alcohol limit. not just because, of course, we don't want individuals to crash and kill themselves, but because of the very great danger they pose to other people. So there are two sides to everything. So you do have to also consider, if you have someone walking around, and I'm not just talking about COVID now, but perhaps if there's something even worse that comes along in the future, if there's somebody walking around who, just by the nature of doing so without a vaccination, is a very real threat to everybody else, then where do you draw the line at the individual civil liberties versus their threat to other people who have the right, also have a right to go about their lives, I guess, without being severely impacted by somebody else. So it's a really difficult decision as to where do you draw that line, and I think it needs, whenever the decision is made, it needs to be considered carefully and hopefully go along with a consensus view. But ultimately, it is the government's decision to make those decisions on it's the government's role to make those decisions on our behalf. And if we don't like it, we have mechanisms in which to register that, I guess.
Yeah, Dr. Andrew, thank you very much. Really good stuff, that. Dr. Andrew Preston there. Great to have you on the show. Microbiologist at the University of Bath. You know, I think even if we did have mandatory vaccinations in this country, I'm not sure, I could be right, I hope I'm not wrong about this, but I'm not sure we'd find many doctors willing to do it. Do you think? You've got someone there in front of you saying, I don't want this.
I do not consent to this.
I do not consent to this.
Yeah.
Do doctors then feel comfortable enough giving it to people? I don't know, maybe
this is all, you've been asking good questions about Austria. I mean, what will you then do if someone refuses? Are you going to... I mean, one of the things that they may well do is just rack some hundreds of thousands of euros of fines on them. So it's not actually physically, but that will just...
Maybe these people will move from Austria. Someone did get in touch earlier, didn't they?
Yeah.
Would we take refugees from Austria?
Yeah, unvaccinated.
Anyway, there we go. Well, look, we're moving away from that now. Thank you, everybody who's been getting in touch. We'll squeeze in a few of your views towards the end of the show. But Jeremy Corbyn has called on Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer to bring down the Tories rather than curtailing Labour members' rights.
Yes, well, in an article published on Wednesday, the former leader of the Labour Party writes, the Tories cannot meet major economic and health challenges because they refuse to accept that free market capitalism cannot deliver for health and people and the planet.
Well, Mr Corbyn also says Labour conference agreed a raft of policies, but the leadership are curtailing members' democratic rights, such as, for example, lessening the number of motions that will be discussed at said annual conferences.
Well, Labour MP Graham Stringer joins us now. What do you make of this, Graham? I mean, there does seem to be some truth in what Jeremy Corbyn is saying, that Keir Starmer hasn't seemed to put forward a coherent alternative political programme that can cut through and resonate with the public and the needs of ordinary people in British society.
I think as a general rule, it is better for leaders of the Labour Party who have had a go at trying to win power and failed very badly if they remain silent. Neil Kinnock has stayed out of most of the debates since he was leader, having had 2 goes at trying to become Prime Minister. Jeremy had 2 goes. I think a decade of silence would be better for him. At the moment, there are real issues before this country on the economy, on health, on international relations with the increasing threat of China. I think Keir Starmer should be focusing on those, not in terms of the resolutionary politics of Labour Party conference, important as though they can be in formulating policy. So I think that's the basic outlook. Having said that, I do think Labour is now at least on an equal footing in the opinion polls with the Conservatives. So Keir's doing something right. I think he should be a bit sharper in his criticism of the Conservatives, and we need to up our game a bit further so that we get where we should be at the present time with the mess the government are making of things. We should be at least 10 points clear. So I think on Keir, he's improving, our position's improving, but could do better if I was to write a report.
And what do you make of what Jeremy Corbyn is saying in relation to punishing Labour members? There has been a big drive from Keir Starmer's Labour Party to push out the left of the Labour Party. Do you think that is what he should be doing? Is that a good thing, or is that causing friction and tension within the party?
I've always had a view that within the Labour Party, one should win one's position by argument and debate, and when it comes to conference or constituency meetings or the National Executive Committee, by argument and votes. I've never been very keen on expelling people unless they have done pretty appalling things, unless they've made racist statements or in some other way have been implicated in something that is completely inconsistent with the Labour Party's views. There is such a range of views within the Labour Party. Expelling people for views, I think, is a mistake. So sometimes you have to expel people from the Labour Party, but it is better if that is for really bad behaviour rather than their political views.
And finally, you mentioned that Labour are now getting closer to the Conservative Party in the polls, and it must mean that Keir Starmer is doing something right. I mean, do you really think that, is it Keir Starmer doing something right, or is the Tories increasingly in disarray at the moment?
It's both. I mean, politics is a competition. If you've got a good leader of the opposition and a bad government, then that's going to be good. It's very difficult in opposition to win against an effective and competent government. It's an old saying, but I think it's true. Governments lose elections. This government is behaving in a shoddy way at the present time. And the point I was making before is we are doing better, but not as well as we should do. So I think the government simply are losing votes. We need to gain more support from people who used to vote for the Labour Party.
Thank you. Fascinating stuff. Thank you, Labour MP Graham Stringer, discussing some of Jeremy Corbyn's strong words for Keir Starmer.
I mean, I think he makes a good point, doesn't he? I mean, Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
Jeremy Corbyn did do us the common courtesy of telling us exactly what it was that he wanted. It's just the British public went, no, we don't fancy that at all. And so actually, at least now with Keir Starmer, he's not telling us anything, is he? And so which one's better? You know, Jeremy Corbyn told us what he wanted, but it got roundly rejected. Keir Starmer's just keeping mum, isn't it?
Contrary to popular belief, I was actually much more sympathetic to Jeremy Corbyn than Keir Starmer.
At least he bothered to tell us what he wants.
Yeah, I think politicians that believe in something, have a transformational policy programme, I think, is a good thing.
Yeah. I didn't look, it comes as a shock to people to know I didn't particularly agree with Jeremy Corbyn's politics. However, he was obviously a bloke who believed, even though I thought it was completely wrong, he believed in what he was saying, and he told us that, and he had some form of principles. I do, however, refuse to believe that he didn't vote for Brexit. I think he's voted against pretty much every single piece of pro-EU legislation for 30 years.
He was one of the architects of the second referendum policy, and I don't think we should be forgetting that.
No, we shouldn't indeed. Thank you very much. Just a couple of quick views before we have to get going. And mandating vaccines, it just seems ridiculous to me. We can't have medical interventions in our lives. That's from Barbara. You won't find many GPs willing to give out forced vaccinations, and that's from Michael. This is a story that's not going to go away anytime soon. If you are just joining us, big breaking one in the show today, which was, of course, that Austria has announced it will be mandating COVID vaccines.
Well, that is it from us here on To The Point, but don't go away. Up next is the briefing with Isabel Oakeshott. I hope you have a fantastic weekend, and of course, To The Point is back on Monday with Mercy Moroke and Patrick.
Yes, 9:30 a.m. on Monday. Be there. Have a great weekend, everyone.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hi there. Colder weather is on the way, but today at least stays very mild. Cloudy for most, and it stays wet in northern Scotland. The exception being Shetland, away from this weather front, but subject to some very strong winds at first today, those winds easing later, and then this weather front bringing that damp weather to northern Scotland. But elsewhere, closer to high pressure, we've still got this mild but rather cloudy westerly airflow. So a lot of cloud around, but the promise of some breaks in the clouds, some sunshine coming through eastern England into northern England later, Northern Ireland, eastern Scotland. And it's a mild day, especially where we get those cloud breaks, temperatures at 13, 14, perhaps even 15 or 16 Celsius there in Aberdeen. Not feeling quite so pleasant where we've got the rain in northern Scotland and staying blustery in Shetland. The rain continues through the evening and overnight in the far north, but further south we keep the cloud cover. Again, some cloud covering the hills and some spots of rain and drizzle around some western hills and coasts. But on the whole, a dry and relatively mild night, not quite as mild as the last few nights. And that wet weather still with us in the far north of Scotland as we begin Saturday. And it comes south, so a spell of rain for Scotland, Northern Ireland during the morning, before it then pushes into Northern England, and it does clear during the afternoon from Scotland and Northern Ireland with sunny spells and blustery showers replacing it. It stays cloudy, roasty dry, but with a few spots of rain here and there in the south, and 12 to 13 Celsius, a degree or so down compared to today. Here's that area of rain then, coming south on Saturday night. It fizzles out somewhat, so not much rain on it, but it does mark a significant change once we clear that cloud. Brighter skies arrive from the north, sunny spells on Sunday for many places, but some showers around coastal areas. It will also be colder.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion